Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to make a video on a book that I have been reading for graduate school. It's not a required book, but we are referencing a model that was put forth by the author of this book. And he's an author that a friend of mine has recommended a book to me in the past. He's a depth psychologist, wilderness guide and practicing therapist. His name is Bill Plotkin, and this book is called Nature and the Human Soul: Cultivating Wholeness and Community in a Fragmented World. And I am so engrossed in this book. It's a pretty thick book. It's like 400 and something pages, and I'm on page 80 already. And I started reading last night. Um, and I have just been so taken by this book. Um, I probably haven't been this just fully taken and absorbed in a thinker's work. I don't know, since Carl Rogers on Becoming a Person, that I read, I don't know, 4 years ago now, that kind of set me on this path of pursuing therapy. And I wanted to just kind of play with his model and just some of the themes in his book and what I've been resonating with, and how it connects to human development as a whole, how it maps onto that, different things. So first of all, before I kind of introduce his model, to add a little bit of context about what his model is um, trying to point to express. Um, he is very interested in the healthy maturity of humanity into psychologically mature adults. And he talks about how we live in a patho-adolescent society, which basically means that, you know, men and women alike are kind of stuck in this Peter Pan kind of archetype of like the perpetual adolescent. And what he qualifies that with is not to demonize adolescence, full stop, but to say the problems arise when people don't age out of the archetypes that they're in. So when people, um, progress through what we would typically think in a chronological, time frame as adolescence and get into their 20s, 30s, and 40s, and there's kind of this like failure to launch where people are still very um, insecure, neurotic, um, attaching their identity to the wrong things, to, specifically materialistic things, acting very selfishly, things like this. And so he's his way of understanding maturity and accessing what he talks about as the upper world, so kind of enlightenment, spiritual kind of oneness with the universe, the middle world, which is our social plane, the realm of interpersonal relationships, um, career, all of the activities that we're engaged in the world, and then the underworld, which is what he really sees as the journey of kind of late adolescence to late adulthood, which is encountering the depths of consciousness. In Jungian terms, that can be thought of as the shadow. He's a depth psychologist, so he thinks a lot about demons, daemons, um, uh, elements of our subconscious. Um, where was I going with that? Oh, he thinks about these things through an ecological frame. So obviously, as a wilderness guide, uh, n immersion in nature has been an extremely powerful tool for him throughout his life, and that's one thing that has really resonated with me as someone who has had some of the most profound experiences of my life in nature. Um, so his model, which is an eight, now we can kind of move into the model. It's an eight-stage model of human development from birth until death. And each stage has both a human and a natural archetype fused into one. So the human archetype is it characterizes how that person is navigating through the world, the actions that they're taking. And then the natural element is kind of the environment that they are in, the context that this archetype is in. And so there's a lot of different elements that he has put into his model that I will kind of talk about. So here you see the eight-stage model. So as you can see, he's playing with the four the Cartesian directions, north, west, south, and east, and each of those directions historically, he draws a lot on indigenous traditions here for his understanding of the symbolism of each of the directions. So east signifies birth, light, where the sun rises. Let me see if I can find in his book. He has a page where he kind of describes all of the different archetypal, symbolic um, representations of each of the directions. Um, and so you can see there both the end of life and the beginning of life are on um, that eastern plane. Where is it now? And then south is warmth. You think about placing a south facing window, that's where the majority of the sunlight is going to touch it. Yeah, so east, new light, earth, spring, beginnings, awakenings, enlightenment, spirit, humor, wisdom, extroversion, ascent. And so that corresponds with stage one, early childhood, the innocent in the nest. And he I'm just starting with, now I'm in chapter one. Up until this point has just been the introduction of the model and kind of background, what he sees the model is responding to in our current age. Um, he talks about how we're in an egocentric age, which pretty self-explanatory. I think anyone would agree with that. And this model moving people to an ecocentric age, ecocentric society, where people are able to they've gone through this kind of you know trans think about it in transpersonal terms, this transcendence, the movement beyond their own identity, into a being that is able to situate themselves within the broader world. So yeah, so I'm in the innocent and the nest right now, and each stage has a specific task. And I don't know if it's just this one, if it's just the one that he has listed on there, and then he just goes into greater explication about it. I think there might be multiple because he talks about like the tasks of each stage. Um, and so he talks about how each stage you to progress from one stage to another is not up to you. It's not up to anyone. And it's not dependent on chronological time. Just, I think, an extremely important thing to mention that we miss in our modern society, because we think, okay, this person's 18 years old, they're an adult. They can be trusted to make their own decisions. They are now, not this kind of greedy, naive, selfish teenager now. They're like, just because they can vote or drink or drive or whatever. Um, and there's kind of this like idea that like if you go through some ritual or rite of passage, that you can, you know, now progress into the next stage of life. And I don't think Plotkin is against rituals and rites of passage. I think to him they're very important, but that in and of itself does not signify the movement into the next stage. He talks about it's when the mystery, and he uses a capital M, it's when the mystery calls you to the next stage. So there's kind of this idea that we are not in full control of our own development, that there's something beyond us that kind of beckons us forth. You can think about that as God, the beyond, the ultimate, um, this voice that kind of draws us. And he says, just because you've transitioned from one stage to the next doesn't mean that the tasks of the previous stage are finished. We are always doing stage one. Uh, and he makes that very clear in the first chapter that to lose innocence is to lose really your sense of vitality. To lose that childlike wonder is to without that critical ingredient, none of the other stages are possible because that is what opens you up to the mystery, right? Um, so I think I'm still too early in the book, excuse me, to really be able to I guess kind of go in depth in like a positional way of what characterizes each of these stages. Um, but I think what I can do is respond to what has really enlivened me about this book. I mean, it's interesting. I think there's a lot that I've been really captivated by so far. There's one thing in particular early on in the book, he's talking about this kind of patho-adolescence that we're in, and specifically with men, this kind of like perpetual Peter Pan phenomenon that I think we see. Um, and he mentions that men have this craving to discover the great mysteries of the world, and that impulse has been through, the modern school system, through the kind of this risk averse culture that we live in, through the model of success for men and women. Um, but I think like it's really done a number on men, which is the traditional go to school, college, job pipeline, that really uh, frames success as this very narrow. This is a very narrow band to work in within that model of success. It's tied to a job. It's tied to economic um, status, and it is allergic to mystery because to say I'm going to go out and explore the depths of my own consciousness or the mysteries of the world, um, is to reject that, um, because the mysteries of the world exist outside of that paradigm. And often they will not make you any money. They will lead you away from your family, friends, everything familiar, your culture, although not necessarily. Um, and so for Plotkin, the development, especially in early adolescence, the thespian at the oasis, creating a secure and authentic social self, and then stage four, which is where he says like his goal is to get people to stage four. Um, because from there, like people have moved into kind of an ability to be other oriented, to have a like robust connection to the sacred, um to have done this upper world, middle world, lower underworld kind of like traversing. um and so particularly, yeah, like the wander in the cocoon, leaving home, the adolescent identity, and exploring the mysteries, mystery and darkness. um like I feel that's where I'm at right now. And that's, again, that's not to say that stage one, two, and three are not also like being worked on every day. And quite frankly, I never really got any of those stages, uh, to like a full robust level when I was a kid. So I feel like I've kind of sped run through in the last, I don't know, say 5, 6 years, sped run through those. And I know that those first three stages, um, it's not like I have mastery over those by any means. But this wanderer, I think I'm kind of on the cusp of like that, moving into the apprentice. Um, but like I just wrote this poem. Sorry, now I'm all over the place. But I'm wandering. I'm wandering in the cocoon of my own mind. And I'm very far from metamorphosis, that's for sure. Um, I wrote this poem that I put out on YouTube the other day, and it's called Captains. And essentially, what I was responding to was like, what does it mean to be a man in 2025? That's the first line of the poem. Um, like, is it to kind of recover this kind of ancient notion of the hero's journey, of finding your noble quest, and journeying out into the abyss. Um, and like, if so, like, how do we do that in a time, in a society that um that's not the majority view, that's not the mainstream view. Um, and I think, in thinking about men as captains, like captains are always taking their crew into uh dangerous, unexplored territory. Like, you can't, what are you captaining, and what's the point of your captaincy if you're not if you're going into places that you've gone before? You know what I mean? Like, if you're going into battle, if you are leading a team on a project, if you are leading your football team into a game against a new opponent, like, novelty is at the core of that, right? Um, and I think that's what Plotkin is really gesturing towards, is humans in a post-axial world. I was just reading today history of some a transpersonal theory and literature class in um, graduate school. This book is for my other class, human development. Um, but and there's a lot of crossover already that I'm noticing. Um, and I was reading it was an article that was assigned kind of just about the history of transpersonal psychology, and it's very interesting. Um, and at one point in the article, they talk about the pre-axial and the post-axial world. And in the pre-axial world, so this is kind of before the Iron Age, so before massive leaps in metalworks technology, which had ripple effects to all sectors of society. Um, the societal structures were very communalistic. They were kind of founded on, um, pagan ideas of interdependence and interconnection. So, think Buddhism here. Um, and, very kind of small tribal societies that, prized and valued, um, but it was kind of like an anti-hierarchical society is how I am understanding it to be. And the role of religion and spirituality was to um, keep intact the sacred harmony between all sentient things in the cosmos. So it was it was a lot of practices that were around kind of epistemic humility of of um, kind of bringing the human down to size, so to speak, um, and in kind of this egalitarian connection with other humans and other animals. And I mean, it makes sense because before you have this Iron Age, there is there's not an ability for humans to manipulate or control the natural environment. You're hunting with, I don't, very primitive weaponry. Um, and, in the not too distant past, you are being hunted if you're a human. And so to position the human as above any other creature would just it would just not hold up to reality. And then all of these technological inventions come about, and not only then do you kind of have this, you know, that brought up the agricultural revolution, different things like that. So not only now do you have humans that are able to exert a power and control over the natural environment like never before. Now you have, for the first time, people are able to, control means of production. And so now you have the advent of hierarchies. Now you have master servant relationships for the first time. Um, and and the concepts of conquest and um, um, uh, progress are very new now. Like that is now kind of structuring the ontological view of reality is to progress, is to evolve. Um, Whereas in the pre-axial age, there's really no concept of to be human means to um, move towards something greater. There was kind of this very feminine sense of presence and care and nurturance. Whereas now there's this indication of this masculine progression. Um, Again, I don't know where I was going with this now. I think to say, yeah, okay, so yeah, so to bring that kind of back to Plotkin's notion about discovering the mysteries of the world and kind of this stage. Because this stage, these stages of development, the kind of normativity in that is that it's, excuse me, is to get to the stage in the mountain cave, stage 8, is to go through this process of, I mean, courage, really. I mean, courage and humility to venture out and to kind of, you know, like learn how to walk physically in early childhood and stumble around, right? But then in late adolescence, there's kind of the exact same thing you're doing again, is you're leaving everything that's familiar. And that doesn't just mean like physically, he's saying like it doesn't just mean geographically go out and study abroad or move to a different country. It's like traverse the frontiers of your own psyche, your own soul, um, and engage with difference and diversity in the world and like see how you manage that. Um, and it is there's a femininity in all of this, 100%. But there is this kind of like masculine um captaining of your own ship, whereas I think a lot of us um are kind of stuck in anchor and we don't even go out of the harbor. Um and it was interesting for me to think about like, I think we all kind of just take the post-axial age of human beings being driven by progress, whether for good or for ill. You can think about the ways that that can be used for ill with economic and technological progress at the expense of the human soul. But even in like Plotkin's mapping of the upper, middle, and lower world, there's a progress there. There's a desire to know more. There's a desire to explore, right? That like that wasn't always consciously like aware and available. Like it is not like self-evident that that has always existed in humanity. Now, you can argue like was that always there and it was just like just suppressed, or you know did there need to be like an advancement in like human evolution and consciousness to like bring that about? Yeah, I don't know. Um, but I think it had a lot more to do with the social changes of how the societies were made up. Um, but I mean, to to even have the motivating energy to find those technological advances that led to the post-axial age, like you had to have, right? Like it's like the car or the horse. It's like, I don't know. It's like it's always tricky when you're looking back at history and you're like, okay, what came first? Like the the like kind of just the miraculous stumbling into an invention that then brought about a change in human consciousness, or was it like the change in human consciousness that like allowed for and I don't even, yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. Um, I don't actually even know how relevant that is to what I was saying. Uh, um, yeah, like I just find this mapping. It's just so captivating. Um, and it really maps onto my own experience of, and I think I started this journey like chronologically, maybe not late for my own, the time that I live in, but you know, later than historically, I guess most people. Um, I felt like it was really only like after I came back from college, and then I applied for grad school, and then I didn't get in, that I was like, okay, I've gone through in some ways a lot of maturation up until that point to really identify a career path, therapy, that I wanted to go on, that took a lot of pain and suffering and doing therapy myself to realize that this is in accordance with like what lights me on fire, but also the gifts that I have to give the world. So that is like, I would say at that point I had kind of really been in stage three for a while because I was really quote unquote finding myself and going through a lot of just deprogramming and like dealing with my neuroticism and my imposter syndrome and my confusion and difficulty committing to things and dealing with distractions and like all of the things that young adults like go through. And I feel like I had settled at a pretty secure place, at least for now, of like, yeah, this is who I am. Like, and I'm like pretty solid in that. But I felt like there was still a lot and still do, but at that point especially felt like there was a lot that I hadn't really done in the sense of um like just like real like adventure and like just courageously like dipping my feet in a new pool and learning how to swim. And so I didn't get into grad school, and I was kind of messing around, working different, not messing around, but like working jobs that ended up not being fulfilling and things. Um, and at that time, I was getting really into wildlife photography. I was living back at home, and my mom had kept her old DSLR camera, and I had taken a photography class in high school, and I liked it. Um, but I had always kind of like wanted to get into it, but I didn't. And, I had this idea that like I didn't live in an interesting enough place to go out and take photos. Um, sorry, two mourning doves are, I just filled up our bird feeder the other day, and it's a real warfare between the squirrels and like every bird species. And I just I feel so protective for the birds, and every time I see the squirrels like go after the bird seed, I feel like rushing out there, but it's like, you can't do that every time. It's just two mourning doves were squabbling over some bird feed. Um, and so I was really getting captivated by the natural world. And, I mean, I would go out almost every day to crack of dawn, and we live right by the San Francisco Bay. And so I would go out and I would, take photos of the birds mainly. And I just fell in love. Just, I mean, just fell in love with just what was like what I was experiencing, what I was feeling being out there was just like utter bliss and connection and aliveness and uh wonder and I was also learning a new art. I was learning a new craft in photography, learning how to see, really, I would say. Uh and I people were artist friends of mine were saying it was really good, and um and I was doing that, and then I guess I wanted more. Um and I also wanted I was moving in because my photography practice was very much like just me. Um I mean, I was like following photographers and I was getting inspired by different photographers, but like the practice itself was kind of just me. And I wanted like a service component to my fascination and love for the natural world. And so I found this nonprofit that does conservation work around the country. They used to be worldwide, but now they're just nationally. And I found a 3-month contract in um, Grand Teton National Park in Wyoming for the summer, doing invasive species removal with herbicides mainly, but also a lot of hand picking. Um, and it was with a 15-person crew from across the nation, and we would be living in tents for the entire time. And I was like, yeah, that's what I'm gonna do. That sounds perfect. And so I interviewed, and I didn't tell my mom because had I had an inkling that she was gonna have her reservations. And I was right. And I bought all this gear, and I packed up my bags, and I drove, you know, 15, I think like 15 hours over there, and I had the time of my life. I mean, it was not without its challenges, that's for sure. Uh, it was very difficult, um, in a lot of different ways, but it was, I mean, it was like it was just that journey. It was like that journey that I needed and I wanted. And, you know, I remember reading Into the Wild in high school and just being so captivated by that book. And just like, you know, obviously I were to journey to Alaska, I would do it a little bit differently than Chris McCandless, but the kind of just the wholesale rejection of the world that he was in, and um the desire to seek out the transcendent, to seek out the enchanting in the world, to live on the edge, to live in mystery, um, was was really captivating to me. And one thing I realized, and I think this is really important to note, is that because on the outside, going to the mountains in Wyoming, being with people from all these different cultures, doing work with your hands, living in a tent, like it sounds like all the perfect ingredients for this, like, this vision quest in the woods. But any environment can become, um repetitive and routine and mundane. And I mean, we were working for 10 plus hours a day. We woke up at 6 in the morning. We made our breakfast with our crew, which was never never enough time to make breakfast and make lunch with 12 other people in line. And then we would drive for sometimes up to an hour to our site. We would put on 3 gallon packs. We would walk in a straight line. We would spray the same plants that we saw yesterday. Um, Oftentimes not talking to each other, people listening to music, us playing games to pass the time, things like that. Um, and all of us hit a wall of this, like, I came here for heaven and this is actually kind of hell, like that experience. Um, and I think everyone who goes on a journey like that, like, reaches a point where they realize that it's actually less about the place and more about how you see it, how you approach it. And I think that's at the core of this descent into the underworld. Um, that stage 4 is really um is really emphasizing. And I think what a journey like that does is that it exposes you to a way of living that is so far out of your comfort zone that you bump up against every single neurotic self like self-absorbed thought in your brain. It just goes to like 11. Like, you know, there were so many things that I didn't know how to do that I have a crippling fear of asking for help and looking stupid. And those were just like every single day, it was like put to the test. And there were often a lot of times where I didn't. And then um either like it didn't cost me, but I also missed an opportunity to learn something, or it cost me. Um, and there were a lot of things that if I were to go back and do it again, that I would do differently. But point being, like, those wanderings, what I think shouldn't be missed is that it's not about leaving your boring little town and going to some exotic place. And if I can't go to that exotic place, then I can't wander in the cocoon. It's like, just pick something that's different enough to the world that you live in for it to really challenge you and like really force you to face your own self. Um, and that's where the transformation can happen. Because if you can really understand what is it that you're responding to, where does it originate from, what's underneath it, um, and what would happen on the other side? What would happen if I asked for help, um, and someone mocked me or whatever? What would be the emotional reaction that I'm reacting to? And really getting underneath and underneath and underneath. Um, and then you come to a place where you can just let that go. Um, and that's the real confrontation with the fear, because the fear wants to hold on to it. The fear is scared of relinquishing control and what would be on the other side of it. Rejection, abandonment, um, being dependent on others. That's a big one. That's a big one for a lot of people when they do this wandering. So you realize you can't do it alone. And that's kind of ironic because like you do have to do it like to wander courageously necessitates being on your own, right? Because you're leaving the familiar behind. And the people that nurtured you and cared for you are not only not physically there often, but they don't have the they don't have the understanding and the tools to help you on your journey because you're journeying outside of anything that they've journeyed through, right? Um, However, the what I think marks a healthy stage four maturation is the understanding that deep down reality is relational. That like we are always in relationship. We are not some self-contained, self-sufficient system. Um, because then stage five, the apprentice in the wellspring, it seems like that stage is about taking what in the previous four stages have been to soul initiation and taking those insights and those gifts and learning how to share them with the world and facilitate that same stage development in others. Like Plotkin says, his um definition of his, he calls it his soul message, kind of like his purpose in the world is to like weave cocoons for other people to wander in, something like that. So like he's at the stage where he's now giving back to others. And I think that is because he recognizes where I think a lot of people stop or is their only obsession, which can lead, and this is in the transpersonal literature that I'm reading, where people can get so infatuated with delving into the self that it can become this narcissistic thing where all they want to do is sit in solitude and meditation and learn about themselves, right? Or go out into the woods in a silent retreat and come back and not share it. Um, and there's this real superiority complex that can form there where you see everyone else as less spiritually mature than you, and you know, and it's just there's a real stunting of proper psychological maturity there. And that's why I think like stage three is so important because that's all about relationships on the plane of social relationships, but that's where you that's where you learn how to make friends. That's where you fall in love. That's where you realize that a fulfilling life cannot be lived in isolation. It just can't. We're just not, we are just too damn relational for that. Anyways, I think I'm gonna wrap this video up because if anyone's followed this far, I commend you because it's like one of those videos that I feel like I've gotten a lot out of and like I've like worked through a lot of things and I've gotten like enlivened and excited about, but like I have no idea. I have no idea if anyone can follow this. But if you have, and you feel encouraged to comment, please do. I really, I really welcome the feedback as well as the start of a conversation. That's really what these these solo videos are aimed to do. Um, and I know that I'll be having conversations about the soul-centric model, eco-soul-centric model with my classmates. So I'm sure there will be further developments in my own kind of understanding of this that I would be very excited to share again. So thank you for sticking through this video and look forward to the next one.